Welcome to the Brew Crew Review Podcast, the show by fans for fans of your Milwaukee Brewers.
All right, Brewer fans, welcome to another Brew Crew Review Podcast. Joining you today is yours truly, Craig and Vince. How are you doing, Vince?
I'm well, Craig. How are you?
Good. All right, so Memorial Day weekend is beyond us, and as we're wrapping up the month of May, the Brewers, after the first 2 months of the season, are sitting in first place in the NL Central, so that's the good news. Obviously, don't like to point out the negative, but the Brewers have been dealing with an unbelievable rash of injuries, and it seems like, in spite of their awesome combination of getting out of the gate here for the 2023 season pretty quickly and successfully, and the really bad start by the Cardinals and some other NL Central teams, the Brewers do find themselves still on top of the division, but there's many challenges ahead. There's obviously some problems with the offense, and in light of that, after less than 2 months and less than 100 at-bats, the Brewers have DFA'd Luke Voit. Does that surprise you at all, or what are your thoughts on that, Vince?
No, and to be honest, I was never opposed to signing Luke Voit. I think a lot of Brewer fans would agree with me that it's worth taking a flyer on guys like Voit, who's had some past successes in his career, including leading the league, the American League, in home runs, I believe, in 2020. But the problem becomes, as I think we've talked about on previous podcasts, is when you rely on guys like Luke Voit. So instead of just taking a flyer on guys and seeing if you can, catch some magic, or have guys kind of rediscover some talent levels that they may have lost in the last season or two, instead of that, we're relying on guys like Luke Voit to provide a lot of our offense. And unfortunately, he wasn't up to the task. And that's what happens with guys you take a flyer on. Some are going to pan out and some are not. And so my bigger problem is with the Brewers' approach this past offseason, not with Luke Voit, not with signing Luke Voit himself. So that it does not come as a surprise that we're releasing him at this point. He didn't get a ton of at-bats. I think that that probably was a bit of a limiting factor for him as well, but he didn't deserve to get at-bats either. I mean, he certainly did not play well when he was in the lineup. I know he had a little bit of a neck injury, but part of me thinks that was a way to get him some at-bats in AAA on a rehab assignment, which also didn't go very well apparently. But I know you didn't like his gold chain, Craig, but other than that, I'm not surprised.
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned the Brewers' philosophy on kind of like, I guess my take on is churning through corner infielders year in and year out. It's getting a little frustrating because the Brewers seem to view the front office, these, first base, DH, even third base types as kind of a dime a dozen, so to speak. But if you look around baseball with the other teams, a lot of their middle order hitters and huge run producers come from these positions. So I don't know if I necessarily agree with the Brewers' philosophy on this, but it doesn't seem to be changing anytime soon. On the flip side of that, after you churn through, I don't know, a dozen of these types, you'll eventually land on a golden nugget. And that was recently for the Brewers. Rowdy Tellez has turned into pretty much a regular left-handed hitting first baseman who occasionally sits against tough lefties, but for the most part is in there every day. So he was a really good find for the organization. I guess their philosophy is to keep doing this until we unturn a couple of gems, which is great. And for a small market team, whatever, I get is a necessity maybe. But and again, kind of borrowing from the Rays philosophy, and our front office and Arlen Stearns came from that line of thinking. And obviously, if you see this year how successful the Rays and how they have been year in, year out, it's hard to argue against it. With that being said, as a fan, it's getting very frustrating to see the Brewers' offensive lack of production overall. I mean, we have in my opinion, a great pitching staff, especially at the starting rotation, top of the starting rotation, obviously for the most part, and pretty, we've had a really good bullpen for a number of years. But it's this offense. And again, most people are just placing the blame on Christian Yelich, who we did decide to pay quite a bit of money on a large, long contract. and he's supposed to be our franchise middle order hitter, kind of replacing the departure of Ryan Braun and others before him, where there was that middle of the order, count on pencil in the lineup at bat, and we just don't seem to have that anymore. Brewer fans could maybe argue that Willie Adames should be, in that role. I feel that that's a little bit overstating his talents. He's obviously a good hitter and a great clubhouse presence, and someone you want on your team for sure, but I don't know if he's necessarily a middle of the order hitter per se on a really quality team. So, and he's had his struggles this year for sure as you look at his numbers. So,
yeah, he is that. And, to be honest, I think we've had this conversation before too, but I like Willie Adames a lot. I think he's a great ball player. I think he's an even better leader. I don't know that he's worth the big money that a lot of people were kind of expecting that he might get on the open market, just given the nature of what shortstops have been getting as free agents. I don't know that he's worth the team investing not only multi-millions of dollars, but multi-years into at that position. And again, I like Willie Adames a lot, but even in 2021 and 2022, when he won the Brewers team MVP awards, his offensive numbers were not bad, but they were also not overwhelming as well. I mean, he had big moments and he had some power, and he is a guy that is easy to cheer for, someone that we all like. But it's not like he blew the league away with his offensive capabilities. I think that he hit 238 last year with a 298 OBP. I'm getting some numbers here from Scotty's interns, but it's not like he's the end all be all answer probably at shortstop long term for the Brewers. Now, it's hard to quantify what a guy's leadership skills bring to the table, and it's hard to quantify heart. So I get that. But your point about him being perhaps not best suited for the middle of the lineup is also, I think, a very valid one.
Yeah, no, those are some really fair points. And I mean, the one area he has shown us is in power in the last couple of years. I never thought he'd be a 30 home run hitter, but he has shown that. But I think and selling out for the power, he's his other numbers, especially his on-base percentage numbers, are not really what you'd want from a real quality hitter. I mean, he's not even, he's borderline all-star type player, but because of those numbers, he's probably not. So unfortunately for Willie, this week he I guess was struck by a line drive in the head in the dugout and a very unfortunate set of circumstances, and sustained a concussion. I believe he's doing okay, and we wish him the best and the full recovery from that, obviously. But that's just an unfortunate piece of luck for the Brewers.
Yeah, it's really, really scary moment in that game, and I think we were kind of all on edge that night, as there wasn't much news for at least a few hours after that event actually happened. And when Willie was able to, get out of the hospital the next day, that was really good news. And we were all obviously very relieved to see that. It was a pretty scary moment. I mean, when you saw that ball coming at that speed and that velocity directly into Willie's face, it certainly was pretty hard to watch. And thank God he was all right. I mean, it could have been a lot worse. So I think we should all be pretty thankful for that this week.
Absolutely. Going back to last week, the Brewers did another signing. I know with our last podcast, we speculated they may have to do something to patch the gaping holes at the back end of their starting rotation.
And Craig, to preface that really quick, we actually, after listening to our previous episode, Eric Lauer was not even on the disabled list yet. So yeah, we have experienced yet another injury to the starting rotation since our last taping with Eric Lauer, who's currently on the IL.
Yeah. And he was now bounced around between the bullpen and the starting rotation and back out of necessity. And now he's on the IL. So this is it's kind of almost getting to the point of being a nightmare. But that injury wise, the Brewers now are going forward. But with that being said, the Brewers did sign Julio Teheran, veteran MLB starter who had been with the Padres organization, and I think he had opted out of the minor league deal with them, and then did sign an actual major league deal with the Brewers. And his first start went fairly well. He went 5 innings. I believe only gave 1 run. Unfortunately, we lost that game. But so Julio Teheran, welcome to the team, and I wouldn't be surprised if he sticks kind of as a back end starter for going forward.
Yeah.
I think that veteran experience was something that we needed. obviously speculated Bumgarner, but Teheran's kind of in that same boat where he had a couple of years of success, not at the Bumgarner level, but at the major league level, and then has really tailed off as he's entered his mid-30s or whatnot, but or early to mid-30s. But yeah, so I think he still has some left in the tank, as you saw by his start, and just experience that he'll bring to the table over other guys that we'd have to bring up from Triple A. I thought maybe we'd get a look at Robert Gasser, but instead he is continuing to have some struggles at the Triple A level. So again, you'd rather not throw him to the wolves at the major league level and hope that he's ready to really contribute.
Yeah, I know that you and Scotty and I had all guessed different pitchers that the Brewers might bring in to fill that hole in the rotation. I think that those guesses included Gasser and Jansen Junk and Madison Bumgarner, and of course it was our anonymous source Tom Carter who picked Teheran, and we just need to listen to him more often. So yeah, thanks to Tom Carter for taking that one correctly.
And again, Tom Carter is not actually TC, we call him around here, because
oh yeah,
doesn't want his real name getting out there per se. But so Tom Carter, that just ignore that if you would, listeners. It's TC, or you can call him Tom C if you'd like, or T Carter. But
okay, Chad, Scotty's interns can fix that in the editing session, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Do want to give a shout out to Trixie and Coco. They're doing a good job with those Willie Damas stats providing here at the last second. But yeah, overall, I mean, there's plenty to be optimistic about, because obviously the Brewers are the opposite end of the spectrum and in last place, like the Cardinals currently in 5 games out of first or whatever. It'd be hard to be optimistic. The fact that we are in the driver's seat from this point forward, being in first place, again, that's just something to hang our hat on. But and again, just to a great job done by Craig Counsell, kind of holding this team together so far. With that being said, even some of our aces are really, Woodruff's out, but we've got Peralta and Burns, and they're not really pitching to the ace level right now. I mean, Peralta got lit up pretty bad his last start. Burns has been pretty madly inconsistent so far. We're really going to need those guys to step up in lieu of the other injuries going forward.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that Corbin Burns is suspect number one for, who we need to have step up. Obviously, he has the talent level. Obviously, he has the competitive fire. Obviously, we've seen him pitch well in big games before. And I think that what we need to do is kind of realize that every game is a big game from here on out. We're past Memorial Day now, as you mentioned. That's typically sort of the early hurdle, the benchmark early on in the season. And at this point, the Brewers have not played very well outside the first, 3 weeks or so of the year. And yet we're sitting here in first place post Memorial Day somehow with a record that's worse than the last place team in the American League East. But here we are. And, the Brewers only have to win their division to get into that playoff spot and to be able to get hot and compete with, teams that maybe on paper are much better or who are at least winning many more games than the Brewers are. But all we have to do is get in, and then anything can happen. So I think that we need to really take the collective approach as a team and even as a fan base that every game truly matters, that we cannot just be giving away games to, the likes of the Rockies or the Giants or anybody else that, seems to have played incredibly well against us this year for whatever reason. And Corbin Burns is going to have to become a big game pitcher even on June 1st. It's to me important that we kind of make that turn now in the season and transition to that mentality. And I don't know how sustainable that is over the long term, but I really think that this organization has to do a better job of adopting that approach.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that statement. And like you said, if the Brewers could somehow find their way into the postseason, you got to be confident that guys like Burns and Peralta and Woodruff, if healthy, will step up and be a real asset in short playoff series, so to speak. Yeah. And a couple of guys that we haven't mentioned too much on our podcast as of yet, that's definitely deserve some kudos. And let's just start with Joel Payamps. What a find. He obviously came over in the same Contreras deal where we traded Esteury Ruiz to the A's, and he was I don't want to say a throw-in, but in addition, it was actually, I thought that they was going to be DFA'd by the A's, and so he was included in that deal. And the Brewers must have seen something in him because this Brewers brass has done a great job of finding kind of like hidden gem relief pitchers over the years too, and Payamps is definitely fitting into that mold, and he's just been pitching lights out, and really in key situations throughout the game he's been brought in and done a great job.
Yeah, Payamps. I think most of the bullpen generally, at least of the guys that are still left, we've obviously had a bit of churn at the back end of our bullpen as well. Matt Bush pitched terribly and then landed on the injured list. Payamps, though, has pitched incredibly well. I think Bryce Wilson has pitched well. I think that, there are obviously Devin Williams has pitched amazing, and he deserves a shout out as well, even though he's sort of taken for granted just because he is such an elite talent. But I think that it's incredible when you do trade a guy like Josh Hader and you've got somebody else who can step into that role and put up actually pretty similar numbers to a perennial all-star like Hader. So I'm very thankful and grateful for Devin Williams at the back end of our bullpen. I think that our bullpen generally has pitched fairly well and been effective, though I do think it's incomplete. We do need more depth there. I'm actually a little bit more concerned about the bullpen than some others are, just because of the lack of depth. So, well, a lot of guys do deserve a lot of credit for the way that they pitched. I just don't think that we can necessarily rely on only a smaller handful of guys that we've relied on in previous seasons. And that comes back down to, again, that lack of depth, the lack of a guy like Brett Boxberger, the lack of a guy like, obviously you had that 1-2 punch with Hader and Williams for the last several seasons. So I want to continue to add to the depth in the bullpen as we near the trade deadline. And if it means just adding arms to add arms, so be it. We'll find somebody that sticks. But, kudos to Payamps for sure. But I still think that we need depth.
Absolutely. And I think it'll be exciting trade deadline this year. The Brewers, I'm assuming, will still be in contention at that point, because I think adding to this team offensively and in the bullpen could really be a shot in the arm that the club could need going forward. Also, speaking of the shots in the arm, like I always want to give kudos to Owen Miller, who's been pretty hot and he's getting regular at bats, and I think well deserved. And especially with some struggles, some rookie struggles. Bryce Terang has kind of held his own for the most part, but he's still a rookie, and so. But Owen Miller, his versatility, being able to play pretty much anywhere on the infield, is pretty. I think it's going to keep him in the lineup every day. And I feel like that we still might see some contributions this season from a couple of guys that are currently injured, both at the major league level and minor league level, and that's Luis Urias, who's been out from the year and should be coming back, I think, within the next week, possibly any day now. And then you've got a couple of guys that I think within the next month or so might, if they're called up from the minors, could really contribute, and that'd be Sal Frelick and Keston Hiura. I mean, Keston Hiura is the flip side of Voit, where he went down to AAA, and before he got injured with a knee sprain a couple of weeks ago, he, in just over 100 at-bats, had 12 home runs, so was hitting 331 with over 1,000 OPS at AAA. And again, striking out at a high and alarming rate. But with that being said, those numbers are pretty impressive at any level. And I think Keston could definitely provide this team with a spark at some point. Especially with Voit being DFA'd, you think that there'd be some at bats at some point. I mean, obviously Darren Ruff is with the team, but I think Keston here obviously has more considerable upside potential. So we'll see as we go forward.
In terms of that roster mix, though, Craig, that you just alluded to, what do you think happens in the Brewers infield mix after Urias gets activated in the next, likely the next week here? Obviously, Owen Miller isn't going anywhere at this point. Do you think that this could spend the end of Mike Brousseau's days here in Milwaukee?
I think that's a possibility. I think with him and the possibility of either him moving on from either him or Darren Ruff, and again, you'd think he'd have a little bit longer leash after the signing, but that, or I mean, I think it's also a possibility that Bryce Terang might get sent back to the minors for another month or two of seasoning and then help us out down the stretch or something like that to get at bats for Urias at second and also Owen Miller. But we'll see. I mean, obviously, there'll be some options and some tough decisions that the front office will definitely have to make coming up with those, to deal with that type of injury. But that's usually a good problem to have a couple more options than you currently do. So, so
I agree, and I do think just really quick, I do think that Terang has solidified himself in this role. I think you and I might disagree on this, but I think that Urias's best role is in that platoon role that is very valuable to have. A guy that can play second or short or third base and step in at all three positions is pretty admirable. I think that Teheran has proven himself defensively, at least, to be a quality everyday major league player. And I think that the bat eventually does come around. He reminds me a lot of J.J. Hardy in his development trajectory, but I just really like his everyday defense, and some of the plays that he's made up the middle have just been incredible to watch. I've really enjoyed watching Bryce Teheran this year, and he is. I won't say he completely surprised me, because I think that he was obviously a very highly touted player in our minor league system, but watching him play defense on an everyday basis has been one of my favorite parts of the 2023 season so far. So I know that Urias has some very positive numbers with defensive metrics as well, but the fact that he can play three positions well means, to me at least, that he is most valuable sliding into that Mike Brosseau-esque role that we seem to have for a number of guys right now. Maybe it's Darren Ruff that gets replaced. Maybe you're right about that. But in any event, I think it's that type of role that a guy like Urias could best fill on our team.
Yeah, you very likely could be correct. That could be the route that they go. The only reason I mentioned Trang, and you're right about him defensively for sure, is that he's definitely a wizard. And I think he's going to be a solid everyday regular moving forward at some point. I'm just thinking, because he has minor league options, and they might even be able to buy themselves another year of service time by sending him down to the minors for a period of time. Even though he started the season with us, it would bump his service time clock back a little bit, I believe. So I think they might factor that in. Also, the fact that he's hitting 218 with a 268 on base percentage right now it is tough. Yeah. But obviously he's got 3 homers, 7 steals, and been playing phenomenal defense, like you mentioned. So it'll be a tough decision. Like I said, it's just that I don't know what role Urias will take on. And he's had his struggles with the bat in the past as well. So we'll see. But I mean, Urias is a right-hander and Terang's a left-hander. So maybe the Brosseau, moving on from Brosseau, is the answer to that. And maybe these guys go into a somewhat of a platoon. So that's a good guess for sure. So we'll see. But yeah, the Brewers have had struggles against left-handers, and that's why I think that's the only reason I think they've kept Brosseau as long as they have is because he does mash lefties. So there's that.
Yep. Absolutely.
So, all right. Well, we're going to have to wrap it up for this podcast today. Thank you for tuning in, all of our listeners, and thanks for joining me today, Vince. Definitely looking forward to some Brewer baseball, getting out to some games here as we approach June, warmer weather here in Wisconsin. Some great tailgating, some great Brewer baseball, and it's always fun when we're winning. So let's hope that we continue that as we move into the season. So
exciting time of year, and please remember to give us a follow, Brew Crew Review 1 on Twitter. Send in your questions to Scotty. We'll get to those soon. Brew Crew Review podcasts with an s@gmail.com, and we'll look forward to talking with you here again in a few days, probably after the Toronto series later this week.
All right. Well, sounds good. Stay classy with West Dallas, and go Brewers.
Go Brewers.